When my husband learned that I was pregnant, the first thing he said was, "I want a DNA test." I calmly answered, "Of course, sweetheart." While he was waiting for the results, I was already consulting a lawyer. What the test eventually revealed changed our lives forever. Hello, everyone. It's Diana again. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoy these stories, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. For many years, I believed I had the kind of marriage people dream about. Not the fairy tale version filled with grand gestures, but something genuine, steady, and dependable. My husband, Derek, and I met 11 years ago at a barbecue hosted by mutual friends in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was tall, confident, and laughing at a joke someone had made. What stood out to me was how authentic that laugh sounded. Genuine laughter is rare. At the time, I was 23 and beginning my career at an architecture firm. Derek was 26 and working as a project manager for a construction company. We fit together naturally, like pieces of a well-designed plan. 4 years later, we got married. We purchased a home in a peaceful suburb with enough yard space for a dog and, hopefully one day, children. We started with the dog, a golden retriever named Cooper. The children didn't come as easily as we had hoped. Over 3 years, I suffered 2 miscarriages. Then came years of trying and disappointment. It became a private sorrow that we carried quietly, rarely discussing it with anyone. So, when I discovered I was pregnant last October at age 34, after what was supposed to be a routine blood test for something unrelated, I sat alone in my car outside the clinic and cried for 20 minutes. They were tears of joy, overwhelming and unexpected. I drove home, placed the positive test on the kitchen counter, and waited for Derek. He arrived later than usual that evening, a detail that would later take on a different meaning. He walked through the door, distracted, loosening his tie while looking at his phone. I pointed toward the counter. He looked at the test, and then at me. I expected excitement. I expected that genuine laugh I had fallen in love with years ago. Instead, I got something else. He smiled, but it felt forced, as though his attention was somewhere else entirely. He hugged me and said all the appropriate things, yet his eyes returned to his phone almost immediately. At the time, I convinced myself he was simply processing the news. I told myself people react differently. I kept making excuses because the alternative felt too painful to consider. The first serious warning sign appeared about 3 weeks later. A client meeting was canceled unexpectedly, so I came home early. To my surprise, Derek's car was already in the driveway, even though he should have been at work across town. When I entered the house, I heard him talking on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low and cautious. "It's complicated right now," he said. There was a pause. "I know. Just give me some time." The moment he noticed me, he turned around quickly. "Work call?" he said before I even asked. I nodded and headed upstairs. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, 7 weeks pregnant and struggling with morning sickness, I found myself experiencing something new: suspicion. Over the next 2 weeks, more signs appeared. He began staying late at work 3 or 4 nights each week. He angled his phone away whenever messages arrived. One day I noticed he had erased his call history, something he had never done in all our years together. Then, one Sunday morning in early November, he sat across from me at breakfast with an expression I had never seen before. He looked prepared, almost rehearsed. "Megan," he said. He only used my name when something serious was coming. "I've been thinking about the pregnancy." I set my coffee down. "Okay. I'd like us to do a paternity test." The words hit me like a physical blow. "A DNA test?" I asked quietly. "I think it would give both of us peace of mind." Both of us. As though I needed reassurance. As though I had ever given him a reason to doubt me. As though I was the one hiding things. In that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something colder and far more useful. Clarity. I looked at the man I had built a life with and made a decision. "Okay, sweetheart," I said calmly. "That's fine. We can do the test." He seemed surprised by my response. I think he expected tears, outrage, or confrontation. What Derek didn't realize was that while he was waiting for DNA results, I was already considering legal advice. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my marriage. On the surface, everything appeared normal. We shared meals, slept in the same bed, and followed our usual routines. But the foundation had cracked. Instead of crying, I focused on facts. That's how I've always handled fear. As an architect, I analyze, organize, and measure. I started evaluating everything I could potentially lose. Our home, our finances, my professional reputation. Most importantly, my child. After years of loss, this pregnancy was precious. Whatever was happening between Derek and me, protecting my baby became my highest priority. Then, I finally asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Why had he demanded a DNA test? Not because he truly doubted me. I was certain of that. The answer was much simpler. He was projecting. The secretive calls, the deleted records, the late nights, the emotional distance, they all pointed in one direction. By the third day, I was convinced my husband was having an affair. And if that was true, I needed to protect myself before confronting him. So, I took a day off work and visited a coffee shop across town where nobody knew me. I sat there for hours thinking logically about my situation. What evidence did I actually have? What would I need if things turned into a divorce? The answer was obvious. I needed a lawyer. That afternoon, I researched highly rated family law attorneys in Charlotte and contacted several offices. One responded almost immediately. Her name was Laura Hayes. She had spent 12 years practicing family law and previously worked with the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office. We scheduled a consultation for Friday. That evening, I sat across from Derek at dinner and watched him stare at his phone once again. "Work," he claimed. "Always work." As I watched him, I felt determination replace uncertainty. He assumed I was frightened and waiting for answers. He was wrong. Over the next several days, after he went to sleep, I reviewed our financial records, documented important information, photographed key documents, and created secure backups that he couldn't access. I also started keeping a detailed record of unusual behavior, including dates, times, and observations. By Thursday night, I had organized evidence. By Friday afternoon, I had legal representation. And Derek still believed I was quietly waiting for DNA test results. Many people mistake silence for weakness. Derek made that mistake. He had forgotten that I was someone who always studied a structure before deciding how to rebuild it. When I met Laura Hayes in her downtown office, she listened carefully to everything without interruption. After hearing my story, she gave me one important piece of advice. Don't confront him yet. She explained how marital assets were divided under North Carolina law and how evidence of infidelity could influence negotiations if marital funds had been spent on another relationship. For the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. Then, a few days later, I found the proof. While using our shared household laptop, I noticed something unusual in the browser history. A restaurant reservation. 2 people. Thursday night. The same night, Derek claimed he had been working late. Digging deeper, I discovered searches for romantic hotels and eventually found an unfamiliar email address connected to a booking confirmation. I photographed everything and documented it carefully. Later, I researched the email owner. Her name was Tiffany Ross. She was 31 years old and worked in project development within the construction industry, the same field as Derek. And suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle started fitting together. The smile in her profile picture was the kind people wear when they know a camera is pointed at them. She works in the same field as Derek, I told Laura. Maybe they met through a project or an industry event. Laura nodded thoughtfully. We'll continue building the evidence. she said. "I'll have a private investigator look into it. Someone I trust. Licensed, discreet, and experienced. For now, what I need from you is patience and silence." Patience and silence. Fortunately, I had become very familiar with both. She also walked me through the legal process ahead, how divorce filings worked in Mecklenburg County, how equitable distribution would be handled, and how the paternity issue would ultimately affect the case. Given that I had no doubt whatsoever that Derek was the father, the DNA test he'd insisted on would actually strengthen my position. "He requested it," Laura said with a faint smile. "Let's give him exactly what he asked for." That same week, I approved the hiring of a private investigator named Paul Garrett. He was a retired law enforcement officer with a practical, no-nonsense attitude. He looked like the type of man who could spend hours observing someone without attracting the slightest attention. Within 10 days, he delivered exactly what we needed. Photographs. Derek and Tiffany dining together at the restaurant in Noda. Derek and Tiffany entering a hotel in South End. And most importantly, pictures of them touring what appeared to be an apartment for rent in a building I immediately recognized. A property expensive enough that moving there would require serious financial planning. This wasn't a casual affair. He was preparing for a future. I sent everything to Laura. Her response contained only 2 words. "We're ready." We filed for divorce on a Thursday. The filing itself was routine and invisible to anyone not directly involved. The following Monday morning, Derek was served at work. Within an hour, he called me 4 times. I ignored every call. When the 5th came, I answered. "What is this?" he demanded. His voice sounded controlled, but only barely. "Megan, what is this?" "The paperwork explains itself," I replied calmly. "You filed for divorce without even talking to me." "You asked for a DNA test while I was carrying your child," I said. "I think we're past the stage of having conversations, Derek." That evening, he came home. I expected that. What surprised me was that he brought his mother. Barbara Collins walked into my home, the home I helped buy, decorate, and maintain, with the expression of someone who had already decided who the villain was. She sat across from me in the living room and began carefully. "Megan, we understand you're upset. Pregnancy hormones can—" "Don't," I interrupted quietly. She blinked. "Don't what?" "Finish that sentence." Derek immediately changed his approach. The frustration disappeared and was replaced by something softer, more strategic. He talked about stress, fear, the emotional strain of the previous year. He claimed the pregnancy had triggered anxieties he didn't know how to manage. Not once did he mention Tiffany. Not once did he acknowledge what he had actually done. "I want to fix this," he said. "We can try counseling. We can work through it." "The petition has already been filed," I replied. "You have my attorney's information. I'd suggest using it." Barbara stood up. The polite mask vanished instantly. "You're making a major mistake," she said. "This family has resources you don't want working against you. Derek has done nothing but—" "This conversation is over." I stood and opened the front door. They left. But before crossing the threshold, Barbara turned back and gave me a look that made one thing clear. She wasn't finished. Neither was I. After they left, I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because I was collapsing dramatically. It was simply the closest place to sit. My hands trembled slightly. My heartbeat felt loud, but I was still standing. Or close enough. The next morning, I visited my obstetrician. The baby was healthy. Strong heartbeat. As I lay there listening to that rhythm, I allowed myself one simple feeling: gratitude. For 3 days, I stepped away from everything. No legal documents, no phone calls, no strategy meetings. I walked Cooper every morning. I rested. I ate properly. I watched movies I'd been postponing for months. For 72 hours, I allowed myself to exist only in the present. Then I returned to work. The settlement offer arrived 11 days after the divorce filing. Not from Derek. That alone told me a lot. It came through Barbara, She sent a handwritten note through a neighbor who looked visibly uncomfortable acting as a messenger. The note suggested that if I withdrew the divorce petition and returned to negotiations in good faith, Derek would abandon the paternity demand and agree to marriage counseling. There was also money attached to the proposal, enough to appear generous, not enough to be respectful. I read the note twice before placing it in the folder reserved for Laura. The message underneath the words was obvious. We didn't expect you to move this quickly. We're adjusting. We're worried. The money wasn't a genuine offer. It was a test. If I reacted emotionally, they would learn something. If I showed interest, they would learn something else. The best response was no response at all. So I ignored it. I forwarded it to Laura with a short note. For the file. Her reply arrived quickly. Perfect. Meanwhile, Derek had hired a family law firm in Charlotte. Capable lawyers, not exceptional ones. That told me he still hadn't fully understood the situation. He had underestimated me from the beginning. I had no intention of correcting that misconception prematurely. As November progressed, the legal noise quieted somewhat. For the first time, I found myself alone with my thoughts. Cooper and I settled into a routine. Morning walks, tea before work, evenings spent reading or sketching. I had returned to hand drawing, something I hadn't done seriously in years. It grounded me. Yet some nights were difficult, not because I questioned my decision. I never did. The pain came from mourning the future I thought I was going to have. The baby shower with Derek standing beside me. The drive to the hospital together. The first night home with our newborn. Those dreams had to be mourned before they could be released. So I grieved them quietly, one by one. My friend Cynthia saw through me almost immediately. We had been close since graduate school. She was an interior designer in Raleigh and possessed a remarkable inability to ignore emotional realities. One Saturday, she appeared at my door without warning, carrying grocery bags. "You're replying to my texts too quickly," she said. "You do that when you're pretending everything is fine." I let her in. For 3 hours, we sat in my kitchen. This time I told the whole truth. Not the polished version, the real version. The DNA test, the affair, the investigation, the confrontation, everything. She listened without interrupting, without trying to solve it, without rushing me toward comfort. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "You're handling this exactly right. And that's what's making it so lonely." No one had described my experience more accurately. She stayed all weekend, she cooked, criticized my curtains, made me laugh repeatedly. By Sunday evening when she drove home, I felt something inside me loosen. Not uncertainty, not weakness, just relief. The relief of being truly seen by another person. Around the same time, Laura encouraged me to begin therapy. Not because I was falling apart, because what lay ahead would require endurance. I agreed. My therapist, Dr. Karen Mills, was practical and thoughtful. During our first session, she offered 2 observations that stayed with me. First, that I'd begun confusing strength with isolation. Second, that accepting support did not mean surrendering control. Those ideas stayed with me. By the end of that week, I felt stronger. Not lighter, more reinforced, like a structure that had finally been properly supported. Meanwhile, Derek and Barbara continued watching from a distance. Mutual acquaintances asked carefully crafted questions, messages filtered through shared contacts, comments about how hard Derek was trying, how committed he seemed. I ignored all of it. I wasn't performing, I was preparing. Then, in early December, they arrived again, unannounced. From an upstairs window, I watched Derek's car pull into the driveway. Barbara sat beside him. They remained inside the vehicle for several minutes, clearly discussing strategy before approaching. I went downstairs and waited. When the knock came, I opened the door. Derek was holding a bakery bag from a place we used to visit together years earlier. A calculated piece of nostalgia. A prop. "We just want to talk," he said. "No lawyers, no paperwork. Just us. I stepped aside and allowed them in. I offered neither coffee nor comfort. I sat in a chair while they took the couch. The bakery bag remained unopened on the table between us. Derek leaned forward. "Megan, I know I hurt you," he began. "I know asking for the test was wrong. I panicked. I was afraid. The pregnancy caught me by surprise." Then he paused. "But we've spent 11 years building a life together. We have a child on the way. We shouldn't throw all of that away because of fear." Fear, not betrayal, not infidelity. Fear. Barbara joined in. "You're carrying my grandchild," she said. "We want to support you. This legal process is stressful. Is this really how you want your baby story to begin?" There it was, using my child as leverage. "The baby and I are doing very well," I replied calmly. "Thank you for your concern." Then I added, "Divorce wasn't my first choice. The circumstances simply made it necessary." Derek's expression tightened. "If this is about Tiffany—" "You don't need to explain anything to me," I interrupted. "That's what attorneys are for." His patience cracked. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said calmly. "You're trying to stop a legal process that has become much more serious than you expected. That's not the same thing as reconciliation." Barbara stood. The mask disappeared completely. "You need to understand something," she said quietly. "My son has connections, resources. This process can become extremely unpleasant for you." She mentioned judges, influence, relationships. She reminded me that I was pregnant and employed and supposedly vulnerable. The message was obvious. Back down. I allowed the silence to settle. Then I answered, "I don't mistake politeness for weakness. And I hope you won't make the same mistake about me." They left shortly afterward. The bakery bag remained behind. For a long time, I sat quietly after the door closed. I'd be lying if I said Barbara's threats hadn't affected me. They had. Fear is real. But fear only wins when it stops you from acting. When you examine it honestly, it becomes information. And information can be useful. I immediately called Laura. After listening carefully, she said, "Comments about judges and connections could potentially become relevant if they continue. Most importantly, are you okay?" "Yes," I answered. Then, more truthfully, "I will be." "Good," she replied, "because your deposition is on the 14th, and I need you focused." "I am." The deposition took place on a gray December morning 2 weeks before Christmas. Derek arrived wearing a navy blazer and an expression carefully designed to appear reasonable. He didn't look at me. That told me plenty. The DNA results had arrived 6 days earlier. 99.97% probability of paternity. Exactly what everyone except Derek already knew. Laura had quietly placed the report into a folder. "We'll use this at the appropriate time," she had said. That moment arrived during the deposition. Methodically, she established the timeline of our marriage, our assets, our finances, and our shared responsibilities. Then she placed the photographs on the table. The restaurant, the hotel, the evidence gathered by Paul Garrett. Clear. Time-stamped. Impossible to explain away. Derek's attorney leaned toward him and spoke quietly. I watched Derek's jaw tighten. He stared at the photographs longer than someone with a prepared explanation should have. "Mr. Collins," Laura said evenly, "can you tell us who this woman is?" "A co-worker," Derek replied carefully, still trying to maintain control. "And this location?" "A business dinner." "At a hotel?" "The restaurant is inside the hotel." Laura nodded thoughtfully. Then she removed another document from the file and placed it on the table. It was the hotel reservation confirmation. Names, dates, room details. Most importantly, the payment information. The room had been paid for using a joint credit card, one that belonged to both of us. In other words, he had used marital funds to support the affair. The color drained from Derek's face. His attorney, Wallace Prynne, placed a hand on his arm. Too late. "There was a conference that week," Derek said quickly. "The conference was in Raleigh," Laura replied pleasantly. "We verified that. You were never registered for it. The hotel was in Charlotte." She paused. "Mr. Collins, approximately how long have you been involved with Tiffany Ross?" "I don't think," Prynne began. "Approximately," Laura repeated. For the first time, Derek looked directly at me. It wasn't a plea. It looked more like realization. Like a man finally understanding that the ground beneath him had never been as stable as he believed. "Several months," he admitted. The room fell silent. Then Laura introduced the final piece. "The paternity test requested by Mr. Collins." She placed the report in front of his attorney. The results were clear. 99.97% probability of paternity. Derek was the father. Exactly as I had always known. "Your client accused his pregnant wife of infidelity," Laura said calmly, "requested genetic testing, and the results confirm the child is his. At the same time, documentation establishes that your client maintained an extramarital relationship financed in part through marital assets." Prynne read the report silently. Derek sat motionless. Laura wasn't finished. "We also possess documentation of communications referencing supposed judicial influence in Mecklenburg County as a means of affecting these proceedings. Those communications have been preserved and may become the basis of a formal complaint if necessary." At that moment, Barbara's threats from my living room came rushing back. The confidence, the certainty, the promises about connections and influence. Derek turned toward his attorney. Something in his carefully controlled expression finally broke. Prynne leaned closer and spoke quietly. Derek shook his head once. "We need a recess," Prynne said. "Of course," Laura replied. During the break, I stood by the window overlooking Charlotte from 12 stories above the city. The skyline stretched beneath me, the financial district, the neighborhoods I had driven through for years. I thought about the woman who had sat crying in a clinic parking lot months earlier after discovering she was pregnant. She had no idea what was coming, yet somehow she had endured it. When proceedings resumed 20 minutes later, Derek looked different, less confident, more realistic. For the first time, the word settlement entered the conversation. Laura glanced at me. I glanced back. A small nod passed between us. We knew the balance of power had shifted. Negotiations continued for 3 weeks. Laura remained firm and precise. She knew exactly what I was entitled to under North Carolina law and refused to compromise unnecessarily. Derek's legal team challenged several issues: the brokerage account, home equity, retirement contributions, but Laura held her ground every time. The affair, the misuse of marital funds, the paternity accusation. Together, they had changed the entire legal landscape. Derek had entered the process believing he was in control. Slowly, and at considerable cost, he discovered otherwise. At one point, his attorney attempted to frame the affair as the result of emotional distance created by years of pregnancy losses. The argument was predictable. The tragic backstory. The appeal to sympathy. The suggestion that responsibility was shared. Laura dismantled it with facts. The court wasn't evaluating emotions. It was evaluating documented financial behavior. The records spoke for themselves. On December 23rd, 4 days before Christmas, we finalized the settlement. I was awarded full ownership of the house, including all accumulated equity and appreciation. My retirement accounts remained untouched. I received an appropriate portion of the brokerage account, including compensation reflecting marital funds spent during the affair. Child support was calculated using Derek's full income, including a bonus he had attempted to minimize in financial disclosures. Fortunately, Paul Garrett had uncovered it through public business records. Derek had already moved into an apartment. Ironically, it was the same building where he and Tiffany had been photographed apartment hunting. That detail appeared in Laura's file as well. It did not help his position. Custody arrangements were straightforward. I received primary physical custody. Derek was granted scheduled visitation. Initially, those visits would be supervised due to the combination of contested paternity allegations and documented dishonesty. His attorney objected, the judge disagreed, and as it turned out, the judge had no special loyalty to the Collins family. He reviewed every document carefully and ruled based on evidence. That reality hit Barbara harder than the financial consequences ever did. Her confidence had always rested on influence, relationships, status, the assumption that family connections would matter. In the end, none of those things mattered. Facts did. Evidence did. I later learned that Derek's attorney expressed frustration about the lack of deference shown to the Collins family. Laura quietly wrote the comment down. She never needed to use it. But she recorded it anyway. That was who she was. When everything was finalized, Laura walked me to the elevator. "You were an excellent client," she said, "patient, rational. You never gave them anything they could use against you." "I had an excellent attorney," I replied. She smiled. "That helped too." I drove home through Charlotte that gray December afternoon, past familiar streets, past the coffee shop where Cynthia and I used to meet, past the bakery Derek had used as a prop during his failed attempt at reconciliation, past the clinic where everything had begun. Eventually, I turned into the driveway of the house that now belonged entirely to me. Cooper was waiting at the window. His tail wagged furiously when he saw me. I sat in the car for a moment before getting out. What I felt wasn't triumph. Not exactly. Winning something you should never have had to fight for is complicated. There was relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. There was grief for what should have been. And there was understanding. A recognition that difficult experiences change you. They teach you things about people and about yourself that you can never unknow. Yet beneath all of that was something steady. The heartbeat I had first heard during a doctor's appointment. Strong, real, constant. I walked inside. Cooper pressed himself against my legs. I rested a hand on my growing belly and stood quietly in the kitchen. I had entered this process with little more than clarity and patience. Now I had my home, my financial security, my child, and myself. Derek and Barbara Collins had assumed that a pregnant woman without a visible plan was powerless. They were mistaken. And in the end, the DNA test revealed exactly what Derek had demanded from the beginning. The truth. My daughter was born on April 14th. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, a cry powerful enough to fill the delivery room. I named her Eleanor. Ellie. For the first few months, we both learned together. She how to live in the world, and I how to live in this new version of mine. Cynthia waited at the hospital and cried far more than I did. That was entirely consistent with our personalities. Dr. Mills sent flowers. Laura Hayes sent a handwritten note that read, "Congratulations, she's going to be extraordinary." I believed her. The months that followed settled into a rhythm I once thought impossible. My firm allowed me a flexible schedule during maternity leave. After 8 years with the company and several major clients, they supported me completely. The mornings became ours. Breakfast at the kitchen table, walks with Cooper, watching Ellie discover her hands and her surroundings. When I returned to full-time work in July, I noticed something unexpected. I was better at my job, more focused, more decisive. The discipline I had developed during the divorce translated directly into my professional life. That summer, I was assigned a mixed-use development project near the Arts District, a project I had wanted for years. I got it. Coworkers noticed changes as well. I seemed calmer, more patient, more confident under pressure. One senior partner told me I appeared more settled than ever before. I smiled. "It's been a productive year," I said. Financially, life was more stable than it had ever been. The house was mine. The equity was mine. Child support arrived automatically through the court system. No arguments, no reminders, no negotiations. The process simply worked. I continued therapy, started running, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Cynthia visited monthly. We ate good food, stayed up too late talking, and spent mornings with Ellie asleep between us while Cooper stretched across the foot of the bed. It was a modest life, but it was entirely mine. Through mutual acquaintances, I eventually learned that Derek had moved in with Tiffany shortly after the divorce. The relationship lasted 8 months. Eventually, she ended it. Apparently, there were disagreements about money, about expectations, about the realities of life after child support obligations reduced Derek's disposable income. The future she imagined wasn't the one she received. I felt surprisingly little about any of it. The emotions that once connected me to Derek had faded. Love, anger, fear, grief. They had all settled into neutrality. He was my daughter's father. Nothing more. To his credit, he attended his supervised visits consistently. He was good with Ellie, though still learning. We remained polite, professional. The performance was over. Truth had made that impossible. Barbara called once during the summer regarding visitation scheduling. Gone was the warmth. Gone was the performance. Only practicality remained. We spoke. We ended the call. I felt nothing. And that, in its own way, felt peaceful. The woman who once threatened me with influence and connections had learned an important lesson. Resources do not replace evidence. Status does not replace facts. What she interpreted as weakness had simply been restraint. One warm September evening, I sat on the back porch while Ellie slept nearby and Cooper rested at my feet. For the first time, I realized something clearly. I was happy, not performatively happy, not proving a point happy, genuinely happy. The quiet kind, the kind that requires no audience. I looked out at the backyard, the same yard we once bought for a dog and someday children. Then I thought about the woman sitting in that clinic parking lot the previous October. She believed the hardest part of her journey was over. She was wrong, but she knew herself. And in the end, that knowledge was enough to carry her through everything that followed.